Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chanakya Forum Dialogues English. We all know that the world is seeing some unprecedented events there in Ukraine, which has never seen after the World War II. One has never seen such kind of events, conflicts with what we are seeing today. To discuss this, we have one of the best strategic minds in our country today, Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain. Welcome, sir, to our show once again. As we all know, he was former co-commander at Srinagar, and presently is the chancellor at Kashmir University. I think we couldn't have asked for a better person than him to help us understand that what is happening and what is likely to happen. So,
thank you very much, Colonel Dinny. I may like to add here that it's a pleasure to be interacting on a strategic subject with a former colleague, young colleague who used to be the adjutant with me in Udi when I was commanding my brigade.
Thank you so much, sir. One has always learned so many things from you and continue to learn from you, sir. Sir, straight away jumping into the program or into this analysis, sir. So, how do you think that what is happening there in Ukraine today? How do you analyze what is happening there, and do you think that Putin's decision of going into war with Ukraine was it in the best interest of Russia now once he looks back, and is the war winnable for him, sir?
Good question to initiate this discussion, Dinny. Well, I suppose when someone decides to take the initiative to go to war, he does imagine in his mind, he does perceive that this war is winnable, number one. Number two, that he's justified to go to war and that it is in the interest of his country. So I suppose all your questions, as far as Putin is concerned, were justified. It's a question of how else does the rest of the world look at it? How do we look at it? Come to think of it, the post-Cold War period, the management of the post-Cold War period was a time when Russia was pushed to the hilt. The conflict termination stage of the Cold War, victory to NATO at that time, led to some kind of a delusion in the minds of the leaderships of NATO at that time, and perhaps led them to push Russia a little too far. This is exactly what happened at Treaty of Versailles, which I've mentioned very, very often, 1919, when the Allies were responsible for the creation of German nationalism. Now, here a pushback was expected. Russia was too weak. Russia was too weak at that time. But Putin has been there in power for 20 years, and his recent speeches show that as not only a nationalist, but he's an ultra-nationalist. And he's looking at Russian interests, and all these years he's been thinking about how Russia has really been pushed to the wall. So it was a question of pushing back now. Ukraine was the red line which he had created and said no more beyond this. The message on Georgia had been delivered in 2008. In 2014, once again, as a milestone, Russia pushed back and made sure they took over Crimea so that the Black Sea Fleet would not go away. They also influenced the area of eastern Ukraine, that's the Donbass area. That was in their interest at that time. And now at this time, when it seemed that the NATO was still continuing to push, despite the situation, was insisting that Ukraine would still become a part of NATO. This is the time when Putin finally decided to call the shots and decide to go to war. Although none of us expected him to go to war, we thought that he would do intimidation and he would probably do a lot of brinkmanship, but he decided to go to war. Is this war winnable? The first few days don't show it. No, victory and defeat are two very opposite things. I hope we will discuss it as we go along in this discussion. But in the perception of Putin, this war is probably winnable. What degree of calibration is required to be done, executed, is a question of judgment. So far, what is evident is militarily Putin has misjudged.
Very, very true. So very true. So one of the defining images coming out of the conflict area is the resistance which the Ukrainians are putting up, including led by Zelensky, his videos, and the people, even common man fighting on the streets of Kyiv and Kharkiv and all. So despite the asymmetries between Ukrainian army and Russian army, Ukrainians are showing a lot of fight to take on the Russians, and the Russians are not quite successful in the manner in which they would have loved to on day 6. So, according to you, what are the factors which Russians army is finding, due to which what probably they would have wanted by now, they're not able to achieve it, sir?
Uh, Good term, the sixth day, day 6. And this reminds me of the 6-day war.
Yes.
If you remember, the Arab-Israeli war was a 6-day war, right? And on the 6th day, the Arab world had capitulated. Today, on the 6th day, Ukraine has fought back. Nowhere it seems that the Russian military objectives have been achieved. Russia decided to follow a doctrine of massing their troops all along. There was not any selected area. Well, this is a very common strategy which is followed to keep your adversary guessing. You decide to carry out inroads all along the front. Now, in this case, they've done it in the east, in the Donbass area. They've come through Crimea. They've also landed in Odessa. They've come from the north towards Kharkiv. They've come from the northwest towards Kiev. So all directions they have advanced into Ukraine. It's not yet decided. Probably it's not. We cannot discern yet which is the main thrust. To my mind, the main thrust should be Kiev, because perhaps Kiev is what they are really after. No, conventional military sense. It relates to making use of shock and awe, like it happened in the doctrine in 2003, that you go in preponderance of firepower, prevent the enemy from thinking, regrouping, etc., take out all his command and control capabilities, anything to respond. He's not in the ability to respond at that time. The people are awestruck, thunderstruck, absolutely. The leadership is in a low state of morale. None of this seems to have happened here. In fact, the Ukrainian leadership is in a high state of morale. If you see Zelensky, he's a hero, a superhero within the country, a superhero internationally. So this is something very strange which is happening on day 6 of the war. I ascribe it to Putin's calibration, where he felt that post-conflict, Russia is not going to be just an island unto itself. It has to remain a part of the international community. If shock and awe is used, it would virtually mean reducing Ukraine to what Iraq was at the end of Gulf War II or Gulf War I, or what Syria was during the civil war, and it still continues to be ravaged urban areas, mass civilian casualties. Is this acceptable in Europe? Is this acceptable? After all, you got to see the theater of war. Where exactly are you fighting? Perhaps the Iraq and Syria, etc., don't have that kind of influence. Did not have that kind of influence. Here, you find this is Central Europe, Central Eastern Europe. This is the doorstep of NATO, the doorstep of Russia itself. You lay waste these areas, and this is something which is not going to be forgotten for long. Remember the conflict in Bosnia, the virtual genocide in Bosnia, not forgotten. What happened in Nazi Germany, not forgotten. It's all a part of history. So I think Putin is actually calibrating a lot, and that has prevented him from using a going whole hog, using air power and things like that. But now that he is not making the kind of ingress, and now that the Western powers, NATO, etc., are rushing to bring in arms, ammunition, weapons into Ukraine from different routes, Putin may just be tempted to go a little more overboard. And that is a dangerous thing, because that upper end of calibration can lead to something more devastating, many more civilian casualties, a humanitarian situation which is not acceptable to the world. And that is the beginning of much more turbulence. So I fear that for the moment. I was hopeful with yesterday's talks, but those talks have not led to anywhere. I did not expect that it will lead to anything finally, but I was hopeful that they will come out with agreeing to disagree. Even that doesn't seem to happen. I hope they meet again, because somewhere down this line, someone has to take the initiative to stop the fighting. Once the fighting stops, wherever the position of the armies are, some degree of stabilization will take place. I'm hoping for that in the very near future, in the next 1 or 2 days.
Absolutely, sir. Like you rightly mentioned, this calibration by Putin is one of the main reasons why Russia is not able to progress the way they want to. Sir, would now because of this, the world, there's a perception being created that the Russian army is not that kind of that the strength of the Russian army is not what it was perceived to be. There's a perception problem, and more so to do with the information warfare, which is happening from the Ukrainian side. There's so many tanks are on the ground and many issues are there. So with this as the background, when there is progress is slow, when there's a perception being created that the Russian army is not that strong, or even the Ukraine are able to, do you think that now they would, like you mentioned, that they can increase the tempo or increase the violence level, but what else can change, sir? Do you feel that there can be a change in the operational plans? There can be a change in the way they're going to approach this entire thing now, because they know that this is happening?
Firstly, let's assume that the Russian army is a very professional army. Much of the Indian army equipment is from there. We have respect for the Russian army equipment. Going back to the heyday of the Cold War, I do remember studying Russian operational aspects. For example, the Operational Maneuver Group, the use of the Operational Maneuver Group, the doctrine of the OMG in Europe as a part of the Warsaw Pact, onslaught into the plains of Europe. We used to study all these things. So huge respect. Since then, what has Russia done? Now, Ukraine was a part of the former Soviet army. So they do have an insight into the thinking of the Russian leadership to an extent, right? Besides that, the Russians have been generally fighting hybrid wars. They have not fought conventional campaigns anyway, nor have the Ukrainians for that matter. But as a large professional army with a reputation, the Russians have fought a war in Chechnya, which was a hybrid war, essentially, more a counter-terrorism than anything else. They've got troops stationed in Central Asia, a division of theirs, which has not seen any action as such. They've come to Syria to protect the port of Latakia and their air facilities and things like that near the Mediterranean. That involved more of defensive than offensive in any way. So at the end of the day, I'm not sure how experienced the Russian army. We have to remember that there are generational changes which have taken place, just like the Indian army.
Yeah.
We've had generational changes taking place from the time 1999, when General Ved Malik was the chief, to now. I mean, there's been a generational change completely. So thinking is perhaps a little different. Capabilities may be different, good or bad. To that extent, I do think the Russians lack the experience at the moment. And they lack that kind of hard will which is associated with the former Soviet army. I've been to Russia. I've seen the Russian army. I have met people. I've seen the training centers and things like that. Nothing, everything normal there. But now manifesting on ground, for example, just one or two examples. Let's take Kiev. The landing of the heliborne troops at the airport. The airport was captured in the beginning. It's changed hands twice, I'm told. Why was the link-up not planned? If the link-up was planned, did they have enough resources to back the link-up? Because I'm told that the Ukrainians blew up a couple of bridges, and that's why the link-up got delayed. Was there bridging available at that time? And these are some of the basics we understand as professional soldiers, right? The reluctance to get into the built-up areas. Not an easy decision to make. You can come and isolate a big built-up area. If you try and make an entry from all over, you're going to get dissipated on ground. You have to choose where exactly you will make your entry, have your deception in place. It seems that the Russian deception plan pre-launch was outstanding.
Absolutely.
Strategic deception plan in which Putin fooled the whole world to say that I'm not coming to war, and then went to war. But the operational deception plan seems to be hugely questionable. Everything seems to be predictable. And the Ukrainians are predicting everything and actually responding according to that. So we can go on and on these particular aspects. One does suspect Russian operational and tactical capability at the moment. Losing a large number of vehicles, losing a large number of tanks, etc. There's no doubt. Ukrainians have made good use of drones. Their drones are very well known. They have made use of drones. They have made effective use of anti-tank weapons. The Javelin, I'm told, is very, very effective at this time. This is exactly what happened with the Israelis. If you remember, the TOW missile in the year 1973 was flown in hundreds to Tel Aviv by the Americans, and that is what was pushed to the Suez Canal, and that is what held back the Egyptian advance thereafter. Something very similar seems to be happening here, and airlift taking place, German anti-tank weapons coming in here. Whoever thought that the era of the tank is over, you got to be questioning this all over again, because we find that the tanks, 1,200 tanks are available and are in the battlefield, and some from, of course, about 600-700 from the Ukrainian side. So the large tank battles are taking place outside in the countryside, beyond the built-up areas. So let's see, maybe there will be a change of tactics. It always happens. And if this is a long drawn-out war engagement, you will find a frequent change in tactics from both sides will take place.
Right. It's very interesting when you said about hybrid warfare. Before the conflict started, Russia was winning the war without fighting, sir, actually. And I think you also, and people like all of us mentioned that there's no need for Russia to go into war because it was winning. It was using hybrid war to win. And when it went into the conventional warfare now, it doesn't look like winning, sir. So that is how things
hybrid
change.
War is low-cost war. Yeah. Low cost. In fact, Russia had transcended from hybrid to gray zone war. Yes. The political and ideological aspects were being also given tremendous weightage in this hybrid war. The information war was of a high order, but the Ukrainian information war, as you very rightly pointed out, is also of a very, very high order. But Russia it could have ratcheted up the hybrid and gray zone warfare by a couple of notches, and it would still continue to actually rule the roost. Yeah. But I think they just got carried away by the possibility of the asymmetry, that they are a very powerful force and they can just go in like this. Now they are having to resort to bringing in additional troops from all over. But it's an interesting observation which I've been making on television very often. The Indian army used 100,000 troops to try and stabilize North and East Sri Lanka against a 2 million population of Tamils, right? And the LTT, which had about 3,000-4,000 fighters at that time. Here you got a Ukrainian army which is 200,000 or plus strong. You got a nation of 44 million people. And the Russians were applying 130,000 to 150,000 troops and 1,200 tanks. I think for years later, people will debate the sufficiency of the application of military power in this battlefield.
Very true, sir. And talking of application of the military power, sir, so what do you feel that Russians probably would have identified a couple of, or maybe at least one center of gravity, and as you rightly mentioned that, probably we still are trying to ascertain what it is. But what, according to you, could be the likely choices, what the Russians would have, identified for themselves as the center of gravity?
I have no doubt, but let me first just explain for our viewers what is the meaning of center of gravity. The center of gravity, as per theory of conflict, is that one entity around which the strength of an army, strength of a nation while going to war revolves. It could be a political center of gravity, it could be a military center of gravity, it could be a psychological center of gravity. For example, in the Gulf War II, the center of gravity, political center of gravity to my mind was Saddam Hussein himself. So the downfall of Saddam Hussein would ensure the downfall of Iraq, number one. Number two, militarily, the center of gravity was the Republican Guard, which was the best trained entity of the Iraqi armed forces. Vanquished the Republican Guard and Iraqi defense would fall like, 9 pins all over. Similarly, you have had such examples all over. A lot of people say, what is the center of gravity in Jammu and Kashmir in a low intensity asymmetric conflict? We always identify the people of Kashmir, right? Many times I say that the psychological center of gravity in Jammu and Kashmir is the idea of azadi. That you dilute the idea of azadi from the mind of the Kashmiri population and you will be the winners. So similarly, the Russians would have spent many hours on poring over the options they have of identifying the center of gravity. But to my mind, it seems very obvious. In this case, it is Kiev. It is Kiev. The financial capital is Kharkiv. right? It's like deciding the physical center of gravity in India as Delhi or Mumbai, right? But here, Kharkiv is the financial capital, quite close to the border. Would the fall of Kharkiv, the capture of Kharkiv, urban areas, mean the fall of Ukraine and the defeat of Ukraine? No, I don't think so. But Kiev is different. The asymmetry war may continue, but Kiev is what you could say symbolically the place from where all power is emanating at the moment. It is also placed geographically, geostrategically placed towards the west. And there are lines of communication which are going to the eastern, to the western border, which is the route which all the Indian students are taking to go to Poland and Hungary, Slovakia, Moldova, and things like that. So it is really Kiev. And besides that, psychologically, the capital of a country, this is a 2.3 million population, which is a sizable city for according to most European standards. I would say psychologically, therefore, it does bring that aspect in the mind that this is our capital city around which everything revolves. So the capture of Kiev is very important. Now, will the Russians want to capture Kiev by plastering it and reducing it to rubble? That is the million-dollar question, which the political leadership will take the decisions, but the military leadership is called upon to give advice. If I was the general in the Russian army and I was called upon to give my military advice, I would say desist from doing this, because you can elongate your battle. But if you destroy the capital, if you destroy Kiev, this enmity between Ukrainians and Russians, you can't even think when it will end. It will never perhaps end. Follow some basic norms of war, look at the humanitarian aspects of it, and maybe elongate the war, it doesn't matter, but don't let a humanitarian situation emerge here. Nations which allow a humanitarian situation to emerge and contribute to the aspects of military victory, sometimes their victory is very, very flawed. So with that, I still continue to identify Kiev as the center of gravity.
Right, sir. And taking that, the last point you made, that victory is flawed, sir. So how do you define that? What sort of victory can Russia perceive that this is what our victory is, or a defeat for the Ukrainians? What is the notion of victory, as they say? What will perceive for them? Okay, this is fine. This is what we have. We wanted. This is victory for us. How do you see that, sir?
The ill-informed mind, which many people do have, who are not aware of military affairs, have not read military history, and not fully familiar with strategic issues. For them, it is weapon on weapon, man on man. Is that kind of an approach. So it's a question of entire territory, destruction of the entire army. Classic example is, in our mind, victory, in the Indian mind, victory would probably associate with Dhaka, with the 1971, 93,000 prisoners, the entire territory under your control, the national capital taken over, its surrender ceremony with the kind of information warfare, with the photograph plastered all over the world. To say that the Pakistani leadership has capitulated. That's the concept of victory in the Indian mind, and there's nothing wrong with it. Our children have been brought up on this. I have been brought up on this. I love to see those photographs. We love to display these photographs. The photograph is displayed right behind me, by the way. It's displayed right behind me also. So having said that, in this kind of a war, the Russians may have imagined that this could be the victory. Go with the kind of force that they have brought in. The informed military mind will probably think that the kind of force that the Russians have brought will not lead to the takeover of the entire territories. It will lead to a squeeze. It will lead to a squeeze from all different directions. Prevention of the Ukrainian armed forces to be able to maneuver, to be able to be in a position to give an effective fight. The political leadership probably getting displaced, which means Kiev captured, getting displaced and probably going into hiding, going underground or going abroad or whatever it is. A government of choosing established by Russia, and therefore and suppression of the military capability of Ukraine thereafter, so as not to be in a position to fight back subsequently. Which means, therefore, the question of joining NATO and this and that, it gets put off by a couple of years or maybe if not decades, right? That is the concept perhaps that the Russians were looking, but probably will settle today for just occupation of certain areas, isolation of the main urban centers, so that there isn't too much connectivity and movement which is permitted of the Ukrainian armed forces and the population, and operational and humanitarian logistics. None of that can move around, and Kiev is under their control. This much also the Russians will probably perceive as victory, and thereafter bringing Ukraine to the negotiating table. But in this case, in the case of Ukraine, the backing that they are receiving from NATO now, you see, initially we all were very, very angry with NATO and the manner in which they let them down, etc. But if you are noticing now, the manner in which Germany has come to this. Now, the Germans are known to be a little, leaning towards the Russians and things like that. But they've even decided to postpone the complete Nord Stream 2 project. $11 billion project, to just postpone like that is not an easy decision. To lift 1,000 anti-tank weapons and immediately send it to Ukraine. It's after World War II that the Germans are taking such major strategic decisions for the first time, right? They did it perhaps for the first and the second Gulf Wars. Even for Afghanistan, they sent in some troops that contributed to the United Nations. But this kind of a decision making has not been done by Germany for long, this kind of support. So Europe has come, Western Europe and NATO has come to the support of Ukraine in no small way, except that they have not sent in troops to fight the Russians. Victory here for Ukraine and victory for the West in this case would be to halt the advance of the Russian army, where broadly in a band of width all along the frontier, not allowing Kiev to fall, and actually initiating a asymmetric war condition, which can elongate this conflict and make this Russia's Afghanistan or Russia's Iraq. That could also contribute. It would be a stalemate kind of a situation, but morally, the West and Ukraine could probably say that this has been a victory for them.
Very, 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 very well put, sir. My final question to you would be: so, what would be the consequential changes in the world scenario after this conflict? So, after the conflict stabilizes, or maybe a few months later, and subsequently here and on, how do you see what are the consequential changes which is going to take place in across the globe, sir?
Much depends on how long this conflict will continue. So that will be one of the conditional things. But having said that, that's a very good question to ponder upon. And this is not military alone. So far, we have been discussing all the military aspects. So this is strategic. This is super strategic, actually, internationally. It is clear that the world is now divided into two major camps. Right? They were always divided into different camps of this kind, but the Russians and the Chinese seem to have come together. NATO and the West seems to have come together, and obviously Japan, Australia, etc. These are the countries which are all supporting. The traditional allies are all together. So there's a straight, clear-cut cleavage in the middle. We will see in the General Assembly when the resolution is tabled there, how do the African countries, how do some of the smaller Asian countries, etc., respond and react, and are they abstaining, like India has abstained? India is under intense pressure, and this pressure is going to keep on increasing for us. We've taken I would say, the correct stance at the outset. The correct stance is informed neutrality, where we are neutral, but we are making our statements, we are making our analyses and putting them out in the public space, saying what do we support? We support a cessation of hostilities. That's an important aspect. So that is actually, to an extent, targeting Russia to tell them, you can't continue doing this and taking this whole hog all the way, right? So this kind of an approach will continue. So it'll create, this dilemma will continue for some time. I only hope that we are not called upon to actually make choices, because our long-term strategic focus has to continue to remain in our area. You see, the northern borders, the maritime zone, which all fits into the Indo-Pacific. The adversary is common. It is China there. Russia is neutral there. If you really look at it, Russia is not neutral to that extent. But as far as we are concerned, we would like the Russians on our side. We don't want to drive the Russians into the Chinese camp completely. But with the situation the way it is moving, Russia will obviously get driven into the Chinese camp, especially on the issue of economic sanctions. Now that SWIFT is coming down, the whole energy pricing, infrastructure, production, strategy on it by OPEC and things like that. All this makes a difference to Russia. Economically, while the sanctions will manifest in a couple of weeks, this doesn't happen overnight, they will manifest in a couple of weeks. The effects of that will last much longer. This war can end in 7 days, 10 days, 15 days, but the effects of that will last much longer and may not immediately get diluted. I don't expect that they will get diluted at all for a fairly long time, right? Which is a lesson which will be there for Russia for a long time. The West and the world as such would like to probably punish Russia economically for this, although in the consequence of that, they will be driving Russia into the Chinese hands. The other major difference that is going to happen is that attention from there are 4 traditional areas of conflict at the moment. It's Eastern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, Middle East, Central Asia, including Afghanistan, and the Indo-Pacific. There are 4 areas. The United States would love to now focus on the Indo-Pacific, right? The not so peaceful rise of China, containing it, etc. Would have loved to see the containment of all these 3 areas. Unfortunately, it's not happened. So you will find NATO's focus coming back to Central and Eastern Europe. The ramifications of Central and Eastern Europe could very well be felt in other areas. It can happen in Middle East, it can happen in Central Asia, it can happen anywhere. So conflict, the way we were thinking that conflict is shifting now, or the focus is shifting into the Indo-Pacific, that may not happen. And this is to the complete, full interest of China, which wants to see the postponement of American focus into this area, because they have got their own dreams of 2035, 2049 and things like that. And the postponement of American focus on Indo-Pacific only works to their advantage. The other thing is that this shows almost the same strains as the Cold War. When you have this kind of a tension and this kind of, even after this war has ended, the potential of small conflicts emerging in different areas, like I said, Central Asia itself, right? Areas where Russia can be pressurized. Kazakhstan, it recently happened in Kazakhstan. You saw what happened there. Smaller conflicts to keep your adversaries, getting Chechnya, other areas of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and things like that. So small conflicts can also emerge and tend to act as pinpricks here and there, which have the potential and scale to be able to become much larger also. So the era of peace we were looking at post-Afghanistan, hoping that Afghanistan is behind us and with not too many people paying too much attention to Afghanistan, it will stabilize and by itself, its risk propensity will reduce. That is not going to happen. The world is going to be a more dangerous place to live in.
Right. So thank you so much, sir, for this fascinating discussion today. As usual, it's always a delight to interact with you. And yet again, you've thrown up beautifully the entire gambit of what is happening in Ukraine, why and how, and what is likely to happen. It's really fascinating, sir. Thank you once again, sir. Thank you so much for coming on Chanakya Forum Dialogue, sir.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure. And much of this, I hope, is heard by our colleagues in the Indian Armed Forces. Because it's good to see 2 former warriors for life, discussing out strategic issues and strategic operational and tactical issues. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this show. Thank you very much. We'll be back again. Thank you. Jai Hind.